Hey everyone, Renova here. Waker is now released, and if you watched my previous video regarding Waker's skill tree, 90% of this will be like a recap but with visuals. So that way you'll know what it looks like if you're a visual learner like myself. But to start it off, Waker is a tech-based class, so if you're planning on building it, it's better to augment some tech damage onto your armor. Some weird stuff is happening on the weapon itself, but I've only heard other people experience some issues, but be wary of that. Waker's skill tree is straightforward. Using Waker as a subclass is great for healing usability and consumability, since skills inside the Waker tree buffs rest assigns and reverse assigns. But first, we'll go over its familiars. Again, they have 3 types: Fredrin for range, Wolfen for close range, and Marmello for guarding, counter-attacking. Fredrin and Wolfen has 2 photon arts each, and Marmello is used with the weapon action. We'll go over in depth with these familiars later, but for the skill tree, we'll walk through it together. Harmonizer Focus, granting you the ability to charge the focus gauges of your familiars. This is what the gauges look like above your weapon palette. Depending on which familiar you use to charge the gauge, it must be those 2. Like, if you use the Fredrin's PAs, it will charge the Fredrin's gauge. If you use Wolfen's PAs, it will charge up the Wolfen gauge, so on and so forth. And by default, you can only charge up to 1 stock. This grants you up to 2 stocks. Familiar Harmony is an active skill that will link Wolfen and Fredrin together for a unified cross-X attack with boosted potency. This consumes 1 gauge of each, and both familiars must have at least 1 stock in order for it to be used. Call Again PP Preservation activates if the familiar's gauge is depleted. Now, any photon art you use that's related to the familiar has reduced PP consumptions for a set time. Treble Clef Marking applies a mark when attacking enemies. This grants boosted potency and increased down factors on both physical and elemental downs. Treble Clef Ignition allows you to detonate that mark by holding down the normal attack button with Harmonizers. Familiar Support activates when you detonate the mark, spawning a crest that does periodic attacks. And depending on which familiar you used on your latest attack, a crest will spawn for that specific familiar. And Familiar Support Amplifier lets you charge the focus gauge of that specific familiar faster. Marmello Strike is Waker's weapon action, allowing you to block attacks, and each successful block has a chance to charge the gauge, up to 2 stacks. Guarding successfully once will grant 1 stack, and then guarding successfully 3 times will grant the 2nd stack. The damage depends on how many stocks you've charged up. You can also just throw Marmello to do minimal damage, but it's better to charge Marmello to the max for the best damage output. Hot Marmello Parry is also an active skill that will negate any incoming damage without interrupting your attacks. This does have a small cooldown though. Hot Marmello Parry's short cooldown reduces the cooldown by half if you successfully avoid incoming attacks with the parry. Marmello Strike Tracing grants the ability for Marmello to home onto enemies when you throw him. Harmonizer Parry Counter lets you perform a normal attack after a successful weapon action counter by timing their attacks. And Harmonizer Parry PP Gain grants PP back when you successfully counter with a weapon action. Linear Drive is basically the best gap closure for Waker. This lets you dash either forward or backwards after a photon. A visual purple shine will indicate that this is triggered, and you can normal attack once the shine shows to either go forward or backwards. Do keep in mind though that the distance is bigger going forward versus dashing backwards is smaller. Linear Drive Encore grants you a 2nd linear drive after the 1st linear drive, so gap closing with this is the best way to utilize close range combat with Wolfen for optimal damage output. For the subclass focus skills, Retro Friends Rescue grants a chance to recover HP depending on how much damage you've taken. Welfare Management reduces the damage taken and boosts the heal amount of rest assigns depending on how much damage you've taken. Resta Effect Continuance reduces the HP you recover when using rest assigns, but you'll get HP back over time. And Lucky Sign has a chance to not consume any rest assigns or reverse assigns upon use. Now for some of these skills, if you care about stat-wise, if you're really picky about stats and want the best ones out of these, I would max out the Retro passive, put 1 point into the Welfare passive. Resta Continuance HP rate is good at 1 point, but the sustained recovery is low. But if you decide to max this out as a main, you'll get 50% HP recovery rate for main and subclass, but a higher rate of sustained recovery rate. So it's up to you. In my opinion, I would leave this at 5 points. and Lucky Sign just boosts the chance of not consuming rest assigns and reverse assigns, so I gave it a 5. Now that we covered the skill tree, let's go over the familiar photon arts. Wolfen Demolition spawns in doing a shock blast with a fist ground smash. Damaging enemies nearby, holding this PA for like half a second, Wolfen will do a horizontal punch leaving a field of AoE lingering around the area. Charging this fully will do a full shock blast in front of you. Wolfen Ray charges you forward, also a good source of gap closing, and doing an uppercut attack. Charging this will do an additional combo but costs more PP. Fredrin Breath fires piercing breaths in front of you in a cone. Charging this will target multiple enemies but will cost more PP. Fredrin Riding fires a blast by tapping the PA. Holding this lets you ride Fredrin, which costs more PP, but you can hold this to remain flying without losing additional PP. When you finish flying, Fredrin will charge at the enemy dealing damage afterwards. As for Marmello, the weapon action is all you need to utilize the counter attack damage. But yeah, that's about it for the skill trees and the familiar photon arts. I do recommend keeping an eye on your gauges since they all charge separately. Wolfen and Fredrin charge by using its own PAs, and Marmello's only chargeable by countering. Using the Harmony active has no cooldown it seems, and after the usage, when the gauges are depleted, you'll gain bonus PP consumptions for familiars. The treble clef stuff with the marks, hold down the normal attack buttons to detonate it once it is applied on enemies. And you'll be generating crests that will help you charge the familiar gauges faster as well. Marmello's strike passive has 3 stages, one being no charge, stage 1 and 2. Where stage 2 is when the 2 bars are filled after charging it, and you can only charge the bars by successfully guarding, and it's also got homing as well. Another thing to know is that Marmello's stuff is main class only, so if you ever set Waker as a subclass, it's pretty much useless. As for subclasses, my ideal recommendation would be Force Sub so you can get that PP regen bonus, as familiar PAs can be pretty costly depending on if you do a lot of charged versions, which might cost additional PP, but anything is possible. Take advantage of the linear drive passive as it is very good for gap closing, as if you learn both skills, you can do them back to back after a PA. Waker does not use techniques by the way, only Forcing Protector can. And Waker seems pretty promising to be set as a subclass as well. The amount of HP regen you can get off of that sounds pretty nice. But yeah, that's it for this guide video. I hope this helps you better understand the Waker class. Let me know what you think about the class, how you like it, all that good stuff. Yeah, I hope this video helps. If it did, I'd appreciate a like, sub to the channel for more PSO2 content, and as always, happy Waker grinding, and take care everyone.